So today we are going to be talking about state and events, two completely separate things in React. There just have to be some things that we're going to be using a lot. So, and I think we can both fit them both in pretty easily. Before we jump in, I guess. Does anyone have any lingering questions about the stuff we covered yesterday about components of props in general before we jump into new stuff that I can kind of help address or clear up?
Not really any questions, but I mean, I just kind of have to get more reps with it. Objects are
Yep.
still, or the props are still a little confusing on exactly how they're functioning, and I've ran into mistakes with just kind of in the practice of just structuring them
Hmm.
improperly, and especially when you're deconstructing and structuring them with
Yeah.
multiple in ones, and you have like default attributes as well. It gets
Yeah.
like cluttered and messy. So just not as much question, but just kind of like how I was feeling yesterday
Hmm.
was a struggle with that, and it's just a reps thing more than anything.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And this is, day, what is it, Tuesday? This is day two of React. You're not supposed to know all the stuff yet. If you do, probably don't need to be here. Uh, but yeah, um, it's all just getting it into your muscle memory, doing it a lot, uh, and just kind of understanding the concepts behind it and putting it in practice. So it'll come. It just takes more practice, more reps. Anyone else? Feeling pretty good. So I think I'm just gonna keep building off of the same one that we worked on yesterday, or that we were using for demo stuff yesterday. And so we have to set up a new one. And let's jump into state. I think we'll start talking about state. So, what is state? First off, why do we want to use it? Um, so we have a way of getting data into our components already with props. We can pass down information from a parent state to a child state, and as far down as we want. Or sorry, props. We can pass down props from parents to children as much as we want. Um, State is it's kind of two different things. State is exactly what it says. It is the state of the component that you're looking at. Um, and importantly, it is kind of how we talked yesterday about, we only want this component to care about what it does and doesn't really care where it is or what the context is or where the stuff is coming from. Just it gets the stuff, it does a certain thing, it displays a certain thing, and that's all it cares about. State is kind of like the next logical step for that. State is that, but not just what's in it structurally, but the data we have in it. So state is I hesitate to use the word data because for picky reasons, but I'm going to anyway. State is the data that we're going to keep locally in that component that describes the state of that component. The way we're working with it now, and all the exercises you're going to see, and even up to and including the code challenge and maybe your project. Um, we're going to keep all of our data in our app in state in one way or another. Long term, uh, we will see there are easier ways to handle stuff like that. Um, and the distinction becomes really important when your application gets larger between your application data. So you make a fetch call to your library database and get down a bunch of books by an author. That's your application data. Just because of the way things are in the order that things are being taught, that application data is going to sit in your app. That's going to be in the state of your app. So that's kind of one flavor of state that we're going to find better ways of dealing with shortly. The other kind of state is state describing the component itself. So that is, oh, is this modal open or closed? What's in this input field? Uh, is this, is this a dark mode, light mode thing? Basically describing the component itself and what is in it, as opposed to data that we are handling in the app. Um, the distinction not super bright. That line isn't super bright. And like I said, we're going to be using state for both of those. So don't worry about it too much. Just keep it in the back of your mind. Uh, yeah, and when we get to, I don't know if you're all doing Redux or Recoil. Highly recommend Recoil later on, but yeah, don't worry about it now. So state is data that is kept locally in the component. Part one. Part two is the super cool part with the React. Um, so when we make a component and mount it, we put it on the screen, we attach it to the DOM, it displays all its stuff. Great, that's fantastic. We want our components to be reactive. That's the name, React. We want it to, well, let me step back to phase one first. In phase one, we have a vanilla JavaScript application. We have some data associated with that application. And if we do a fetch request or user hits something or inputs something, um, the data in that application is going to change. Um, I wasn't your teacher for phase one, so this may have not been pounded into you as much as I would, but keeping your data and your display separate are incredibly important. Never want to keep your data in the HTML super bad, but it happens. So one way or the other, you're either going to be modifying the objects or lists that you're hanging onto in your array, or doing something with that, or list arrays that you're hanging onto in your app. And then when that changes, then you have to somehow manually redisplay that stuff on the screen. So if you wrote a render books function or whatever, that kind of like cleared out the current list of books and put the new ones in, or just appended them on, or changed the user that was logged in or whatever. That's you changing the data, hopefully, and then redisplaying or changing the page somehow, whether it's by clearing it out and making it all over again, or just changing the text content of an element. But that's a manual process. And as we saw with components and props and whatnot, uh, React is designed to make a lot of that easier. So the cool thing with state is that we're still keeping that data in our project somewhere. When that state changes, whether it's application data or the physical state of the component, when that data changes, when it's in state, when that state changes, when it changes, React is hooked into it and says, the information has changed. My model has changed. I'm going to re-render this component. I'm going to update the view of this. I use change loosely. State is only updated, not changed, which is very subtle, but don't worry about it just yet. So basically, components have states associated with them that are data. When that data changes, the view will also update. It will re-render the component. And that is the cool thing about state. State is a little bit difficult to demonstrate without also talking about our events, I guess, because of the nature of state. To show it off, we need to be able to change it somehow, and that needs to change via some mechanism. Events are a great way to do that. So I'm going to just pop into some code for a little bit and kind of talk along as we demonstrate the things that we're talking about here, and hopefully that will make it more clear than just my yammering on about it. So let me go ahead and share the screen. controls. Great. Put your little faces over here to show up. Sweet. So great. Yeah, there it is. This is our little thing. I'm going to simplify that. This is our little. This is our very simple thing that we did yesterday. We have a little header component. We have a body component. I'm just going to, well, I'll leave it like that. That's fine. So right now we have a dog list that we brought in from here. This is just a constant that's sitting around, and it's displaying it once when it renders. If I start it up here, that will show up in one of my many browsers. Hopefully this one. There it is. Cool. And so, there we are. It's rendering out the header, and we've told it to map through a bunch of dogs. So that's how that works there. So we have this list of data. If we change it somehow, nothing's going to happen. And that would be the same if we had like, const. I'm not even going to bring it in from data here. I'm going to grab it here. I'm just going to say const dog list. Equals that. So we have our list. It should render the same way. There we go. If we change this in our code, this would not update. If we did a fetch request to change it, grabbed a new item from user input, that would not update until we re-rendered it somehow. React lets you do that manually. I don't recommend it. So let's take a look at what it means for state to change and the component to update. I'm going to get rid of our dogs here to make it a little bit easier. I'm even going to get rid of our header. That, I'm getting rid of everything. Let's start fresh. So I'm going to create a state. There are a few different ways to create a state, but modern React uses these things called hooks. They're called hooks because they are simple ways for you to create variables, constants, whatnot, that hook into the React lifecycle of putting something on a page, waiting for data to change, re-rendering it, dismounting stuff. And hooks all have a common sort of form. Hooks are all use something. We can see a bunch of stuff here. What we're interested in is use state. It's going to need to be imported from React. If your VS Code or whatever does not import it automatically, you'll have to import it manually from React. And we're importing by name here. So that means this is almost a little bit like destructuring. It looks a little bit like it, but it really isn't. This is basically saying, hey, go into this module, React, and pull out just the thing with this name on it, which in our case is use state. So use state is going to be used to create a state. And a state in React, the programmer interface of it has two parts. We've got a way to get a state. So say we want to set, we're going to do a counter, easiest way. Here's our count. So we have a count queuing strategy. We have a count, and we have a way to, so we have a way to read that data, and we need a way to set that data. So we'll call it set count. And so these are variables or constants that are going to be functions that use state returns. And it looks like this. So we're going to set up our constants, and this is a uh, I think it's, yeah, it just returns a list. So this is kind of that destructuring thing here. Again, you can destructure both objects and arrays. Um, I don't think we really talk too much about like how this is destructuring. It's just kind of like, this is the way you do it. But useState returns an array, and we are assigning those things in the array to two constants. The first one is the getter. The second one is the setter. UseState needs one more thing though, and it needs a default value. So before we change the state at all, the state is going to be set to this. And let's just show it here. Real easy like. And see what that looks like on the page. Ooh. Hey, count is 0. Let me put that in like an H1 or something. Yeah. Oh, there's our count. Great. So we've set a default state. We have put that default state on the page. And now we want to see what happens when we change that state. I haven't really shown you a lot yet, but I've talked a bunch. Is there anything I've talked about so far that you want more clarification on, or something? Oh yeah, any questions so far?
Just really quickly, that when you say from React, that'll
Hmm.
just say like be noting that it's a React function, right? Like just kind of generally theoretical level. I've
Mm,
seen that before, but
yeah,
where is
so
that React from?
yeah, great question. Great question. Yeah, and this is something that we just kind of like do and take for granted. We're like, just put this at the top. So what is it actually doing though? So import is a JavaScript thing. It's not, it's not just a React thing. It's just plain old JavaScript. And import says, hey, I'm going to bring something in from a module. From the module we're going to bring it in is from React. What's a module? We made a module yesterday. This is a module. This is a JavaScript file that has some stuff, and we're exporting it. So we can import from that. So React is also a module. Where do we find our modules? Oh, look over here. We got some node modules. Uh, so React, and pretty much anything you install with npm, it's going to install a lot of things. If you look at the size of your node modules folder, uh, like that's that's almost half a gig of stuff, which is wild. But that's just like the baseline of what we do these days. So upshot is we can actually look in here. Let's node modules React, and we can see all the stuff that's in it. And in fact, if we want to, we can look at. Ooh, buckle up. Oh, that's fine. One of these is going to be our, yeah. So this is React. This is the whole React library written in JavaScript. So basically, if we look for useState should be in here. Oh, it should be in one of these. One of these will have. Oh, there we go. Question 4. So it's just a function that's in the React library. And so when we say import useState from React, it's just saying, hey, give me that function.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah. And this is another thing that like you don't necessarily need to know it to work, but to debug is good to know. Because if you're missing a module, it's not going to be there, and you need to track it down. Mm. Cool. Did that answer what you're asking?
and it wasn't even like a requirement thing that we had to go over. So I appreciate you going over that
Yeah,
anyways.
yeah, yeah. It's all none of it's required. It's just enough to do stuff. Um, great. So we've got our state here. And so use state is a function. We're assigning that function to this name, and we're using it to, when we call it, it returns a small array with two things, a getter and a setter, that we can use here. So we've used the getter. Let's talk about what it means to use our setter. So this is just it looks like a variable. It's basically just a variable, a constant, that we can use anywhere. If we want to use it up here, we can just, console log count. And when we go to our app, there's our count. Great. So let's talk about what it's going to take to change that number. To change that number, we're going to need some sort of input. And to do that, I'm going to add a button down here. Let's say increment. And so that should give us a little button here. Great. Yeah, cool. I'm going to do something real fast just to make this a little bit nicer because it's bugging me. Let's get this. Let's get skeleton. Cool. Let's copy that tag here. Skeleton is like a super, super lightweight CSS library that just kind of makes things look a little bit better. I don't think I need to restart. A little bit. Okay. I'm gonna make this div a what's the class they use? Class name equals gosh, what is it? This is a complete digression. It is grid, there's like typographies or forms. I forgot what it is. I used to use this all the time, and now I don't. Anyway, get skeleton, super cool. All right, recommend it. Container, I think it's container. Okay, that's fine. Link to get skeleton, yeah. I literally use this for every single project of my own because it makes things look fine by default, and you can add onto it really easily.
Can you? I know I don't want to detour anymore, but can you post that info just in the Discord when you get a
Yeah,
chance?
yeah. Looks like
Oh,
Dylan
did
just put
you?
it in there. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, you did.
yeah, yeah. It's super, super nice, super fun, and it's relatively small, so you can just look through it and learn a lot of CSS stuff. But cool. Here's our nice little account, and here's our button that says increment. It doesn't do anything yet, but let's make it do something. So we're going to hook up an event. What is an event? Well, we know from phase one, you can add an event to an HTML element, in this case, a button, by doing add event listener. That's the old way. We would get the element by ID, we'd add an event listener to it, a function, all that stuff. We don't have access to elements like that anymore. We can still do a document get element by ID and get a thing. In general, we probably never, ever, ever want to do that when we're using React because it's gonna clash with the way that React handles things. So the way we add events in React is just by adding them directly to tags here. And it's slightly different. So if I want to click event, I'm going to say onClick equals something. I'm going to put it in curly brackets. So again, whatever's in there, whatever's in curly whether it's like count above there, or you can't see me pointing with my hands to my screen, whether it's count there or a non-click or whatever, it's a value, it's an expression. So we want a function in there, and we can write it in line, but for simplicity's sake, I'm going to make a new function out here, and I'll just put it down here. And this function is just going to be called handle click. And since it's an event handler, it's going to take an event and then do some stuff. I'll say console. Cool. And so now we can just say on click equals handle click. So we're just saying take this event, or take this, it's a function, take this function, and when that button is clicked, run that function. The structure format of these event handler functions is almost identical to what you're used to in vanilla JavaScript. There are some minor differences that you probably won't run up against, but it is mostly the same. So if you know how to write event handlers in vanilla JavaScript, you know how to write them in React, mostly. Yeah, so let's see if that helped. And hey, we clicked it. Click, 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 click. Great. So that's one way of doing an event handler. We can also do it inline. I'll just demonstrate that real quick. We can do an arrow function. We'll take the event and we'll just say console log. Blah, blah, blah. So this is just an inline event handler. Neither one, that's not a token. Console log equals, there we go. Yeah. Nope. What did I do? Something down here. What's that? Oh, I commented on the closing. There we go. Cool. So inline, otherwise functionally equal. Again, just matters which looks better to you. I like to pull them all out unless, oh, I don't know. It's a matter of preference, really. Depending on what the vibes are, basically. A lot of times I'll pull them out, but sometimes it's just easier to put a little one-liner there. Anyway, let's do it the way that I did it originally and put our function there. Cool. So we have an event. We have a click handler for that, or sorry, we have a element. We have a click handler attached to that element for that event, and we do some stuff when we handle that click. Clicked. Click, click, click. Great. So now, now that we know that, actually, before we proceed, what questions do you have about events? This is the basics, the barest basics. None yet. Great. And pretty much all the events. Did you all do the DOM content loaded event in phase one, or did you use defer?
Both.
Both. Yeah.
Do both. Yeah.
Yeah. In this year of our Lord 2023, you pretty much never need to use DOM content loaded. So yeah, cool. But you'll never be touching that one in React, but pretty much every other event is available to you. Clicks, mouse moves, typing, on change, submits, all of that, which you'll be using quite a bit in the future, near future. So cool. We have our event handler handled. So we have a clicked. Let's go ahead and instead of just saying clicked, we're going to use our state setter and update that there. So we're going to say set count, and all it's going to do is set it to the current count +1. Cool. And so let's click the button and see what happens first. Prove that I'm not lying. Hey, look at that. Count go up. Awesome. So walking through exactly what's happening here again. We've got our component. This is just our app component, the main outer component. In this component, we are displaying a count and a button. Count is, so we have a state. We're using use state to set the state when we're initializing it with 0. That gives us two things: the count, which gives us the value, and set count, which is a function that sets the value. So we're using both of these. We are displaying count in our JSX here, and we have a click handler that goes on click, calls the handle click function with the event, and we're not even using the event, so we really don't need that. And that is when that gets clicked, we're going to use the setter set count to set the state count to count +1, the current count +1. And then the stuff that React handles, since the states are hooked into the React cycle, when the state changes, React says, aha, something has changed. I need to redisplay that. And then it re-renders this onto the page. This may seem wasteful if you think about like, oh, if I have a list of 1,000 things and one thing in the list changes, it re-renders the whole thing. It seems like that would be inefficient and wasteful. And, you know, it is a little bit, but nobody's going to notice. React is very good at making that pretty quick. They do a lot of clever things with caching and shadow DOM and whatnot. So the cases that you'll come across are very rare where that enters into stuff at all, and there are ways around it. So for now, it just renders stuff when things change, and it handles it really nicely. And it doesn't even feel like it's going away at all. So there it is. And when I say re-render, what do I mean when I say re-render? Well, what happens in React?
They're reposting it to the DOM. Meaning like updating
Yeah,
what's available on the DOM
yeah. And how does it know what to put in the DOM?
based off of the set count and the stuff that we defined.
Yeah, and it's basically running this function again and taking the return value of that function and putting it in there. So every time the state changes, every time it re-renders, this whole function gets run. And that's why these hooks are kind of special, because if it was rerun every time, you would think, oh, it's just going to set that state to 0 again every time. And because of the way that it's hooked into React, it handles it very nicely. But that does mean that, like, I can say, console log, hey, I'm being rendered. So if we go over here and reload, let's start from scratch. It's being rendered from the start. When we increment the count, hey, it's being re-rendered again. Hey, it's being re-rendered again. So this whole page is being re-rendered again. That means this whole function is being re-rendered, which means that if you have child components that are also being rendered, especially if state is being passed down, which we'll like in just a second, those are being re-rendered as well. Lyra, yeah, you had a hand up.
Okay, I don't know if what I'm asking is even gonna make sense.
Mhm.
But does this process sort of make it easier to update like the back end? Like,
Mm,
does that make it like faster? Because what we've been doing is like the post patch and stuff,
mhm.
but it looks like it's sort of done in, I don't know, like a different order.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's actually pretty much exactly the same. So when we get to hooking fetch requests into here, those are going to look very, very, very similar to what you're used to. And so basically, like for a get request, when it loads, we'll do a get request, get that data, and put that data into state. So that data will be in a certain state, probably like an empty array or an empty object for starters. We'll make that fetch, we'll update the state with the results of that fetch, and then it'll re-render. And the same thing with post, patch, put, delete, all that stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
is there more stuff in there that you want to poke at?
No, no, no. And then for adding, because you were saying that you're initializing it in
Mhm.
the parentheses for use state.
Yeah.
So can you add like more than one variable in that initial, like, so you have like count and then set count as a function. Could you do count and then more variables or
Yeah, you can do
more
as
functions?
many states
Okay.
as you want. Here's our dogs, here's our set dogs. Yeah, so you can do as many states as you want. Um,
But could you
after
have more than one variable and function in one use state? I don't know if that makes sense.
no, in general, one use state maps to one thing. So
Okay.
our count is going to be one thing. Our username is going to be one thing. Our list of books is going to be another thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Cool. Um, and that actually kind of gets to like points at interesting little side point. So say say we do have a list of dogs, and we'll. Oh, I don't want to do forms yet. Um, hmm. So you won't really run into this until we start messing with data and whatnot. Um, but just try to keep in mind that whatever the initial state is of your state is always going to be rendered the first time, even if you're doing a fetch when the component loads. Um, it's always going to render the component fully first, which means that if you're doing a map or sort filter, anything else that's using like an array state, make sure that you are initializing it with an empty array. Because if we initialize it with 0 or undefined or an empty string, and you're doing that map down there, it's not going to know what to do, and it's going to bomb out. So the important point to remember when we get to that part is make sure that the initial state you have is the same shape or the same data type as the data that's eventually going to be in there. It'll save you a lot of problems in the future. Cool. So this is just like the bare bones basic how to do with state and events. What other questions do we have here? What else we want to talk about?
I had an additional question um, that actually your set dogs example kind of answers, but this is actually something I was thinking earlier while going through the curriculum is um, so hooks as like a concept are these
Mhm.
pre-existing functions inside of React. Is that correct? Is that a good way to describe it?
There are a set of pre-existing hooks in React, yes.
Okay.
You can also write your own hooks, which is super fun. And if I wind up teaching you more stuff, I will definitely show you later.
That'd be great. Okay, perfect. Because I think yeah, the the curriculum was using hooks, and I was like, I don't understand what that even is. When
Mhm.
I Googled it, what are hooks? It was just what they do, not what they are.
Yeah,
Which is like standard coding, just to be like, this is what it does, and I
yeah.
just
I
don't
need to
understand.
know the
But
ontological. Yeah. Um,
yeah, exactly.
yeah, and literally what they are is so going from kind of broadest to most specific, like they are functions. So whether they come from React or not, this is a function that you're running that returns an array that has a value and a function that changes that value. So use state, use effect, use state, use effect are the ones that you're going to use 90% of the time. They're literally just functions. They're just JavaScript functions. There's nothing special about them in that respect. The specialness is that they are functions that you import from the React library. And so the stuff that's inside those functions is interwoven with all the rest of React systems to watch for when the state changes. And in fact, like they took the easy way out or easier way out. It's very well written. But by using the setter, they can just say, because this is a function as well, right? We're running this function to set the count. When this function runs, basic, like dumbest abstraction is it runs this function and takes in the new value. It sets that new value here, and then it calls React's re-render function. And there's a lot more intelligence to it than that. But basically, all this does is set this value and then say, hey, React re-render. So again, literally just a function, and the set count value looks basically like count equals value, and then whatever that function is. Like that's the essentials of what that function does. And then the use state function basically looks like whatever the thing is equals our value, and then it's going to return our count, and a function that's like set count that does that thing we just typed. So at the core of it, they're actually very simple conceptually. There is kind of a veil of mysticism about them, just because I don't think it's intentional. It's just that, oh, like to make this thing work, type this thing. Great, it works now. And you don't really need, 90% of the time, you don't need to dig deeper into it unless you're actively contributing to the React project. But that's the highest hand wavy level of what those things are doing. So I hope that demystifies it a little bit.
That's great. You actually anticipated my follow-up question, which was just, I guess just the colors in VS Code make me curious as well. So there's a part of working through this that made me go, wait, how did count and set count become different colors, and what's the logic behind that? So your example there perfectly answered the question that I was about to ask, which was, what are these two what are these two doing? Because I definitely came across kind of the thought of like, okay, well, great that I just follow this syntax and it does a thing.
Yeah.
That's good. But I wanted to know more about what's going on underneath the hood. So this is perfect. That was great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the tricky bit, I guess, and this is kind of in the weeds a little bit, is that, when we call set count, it is, this count variable exists like in React land somewhere, and set count is setting that React land count variable, and then it's saying, hey, re-render, which runs this function again, and then that's where this new count is set to that value. So you can, like, the code is all open source. You can look through it. It's literally right here in your node modules. If you're curious or want to blow your own mind, like there's no magic. It is all written in JavaScript, and with a bit of study, you can definitely understand exactly what's happening. It is very convoluted, but it's fun. It's fun to look through if you're ever bored, and then that sounds fun to you. But yeah, it's basically just what I said. So you don't need to know any of that to use it. You can literally just say import use state from React, set up your getters and setters with an initial value, and then use them as here. All that theory behind it is really incredibly useful, especially when things start going wrong, which they will. It's useful to understand exactly the mechanisms behind them. But if you just want to pass the code challenge, go for it. That's it. This is all you need.
Would set count almost be considered like a hook inside of, or really the setter be considered a hook inside of the use state hook? Is that like a way to think about it? Or probably maybe talk about, I don't know.
Yeah,
how would you?
Not so much, because it doesn't like really hook into, like, it's I just tried to use a fishing analogy that's not, like, it's the bait that's on the hook. It's not. It's the fishing pole. I don't know. It's basically the hook is the thing that's like fully enmeshed in the React land, and set count is just like the thing that it extends to that kind of has a tail in React land. It's still like hooked into the whole React system, but officially in React, unless it's a function that starts with use, it's not a hook.
Got it.
It's
Okay.
the fish you caught.
Yeah, it's the fish you caught. Exactly. There you go.
It's on the hook. It's just not related to the hook at all.
Yeah, perfect. Cool. Any other like overarching questions about this stuff?
I had a question and I don't know, I don't really understand it, so it may not make
Mhm.
any sense.
Yeah, yeah.
But in regards to the set count and the count, I was reading in the curriculum something about the count not being like rendered or re-rendered or something correctly unless you use an arrow function in that like function handle click, something like that. So it was telling me to
Hmm.
use like an arrow function, so I'd be like set count and then count uh arrow function and then count +1 or something like that. But I wasn't really understanding.
Do you know where in the curriculum that is?
I'm not off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I can take a look at it.
Yeah, if you come across it, shoot that to me because I'm curious why they would say that. Um,
Okay.
it's
I bumped into something like that
yeah.
where uh, when I was working on one of the labs, it basically was a hoisting issue. So a
Mm,
lot of the function declarations, I think, in the curriculum use const handle
mhm.
click than anonymous arrow function.
Yeah,
But I wanted to do that below the return. I don't know
yeah.
if
So
that's something that you ran into, Jimmy.
if you did like const handle click equals, and whether you're doing a function like that or a regular function, it's after the return, so it doesn't exist as far as. Um, but if it was, I don't know, somewhere below the return, it can't be, I guess. But if you want to do it above the return, this is your if you're doing so. This is the difference between expressions and statements. This is an expression. This is an expression. Function, blah, whatever, is an expression that returns a function object. And then the const handle click says declare a constant called handle click that gets the value that's returned by this expression, which happens to be a function object. The way we had it before, they are functionally identical for the most part. So this is a function statement. So this does the hoisting thing that we rarely need to worry about. We need to worry about less than we used to. But basically this says, hey, on your first run through processing this file, we're gonna create a function that exists in this namespace, and then it'll be accessible when we start running code. So I like putting them afterwards to keep it more organized. For me, other people like doing it different ways. Again, whichever way works for you is best. So you can do a const whatever function up top. You can do a function statement like this. You can do your you know uh, event. Yeah, set count. Count this one like that. These all do exactly the same thing. Um, so as long as it works, rule one, whether you do it up top as a const, below as a function declaration, inline as an arrow function. You can also do the arrow function up here by saying const handle click equals like that. So you can also do a function expression like that. All four of those ways do exactly the same thing as far as we're concerned. Which one you use depends on what makes your code most understandable to you. There is not a right or wrong way to do it. Again, if you're working with a team and the team already has a way they like to do things, do it that way. But play around with it, see which way works best for you, and whichever way works best for you, that's the right way. And that may change as you get more experience. You are always willing to change your mind about what works best for you. Yeah, all four of those are basically equivalent. If someone tells you that you have to do it one way or the other, that's a red flag for me. And that goes for me too. If I tell you something has to be one way or the other, I'm probably wrong. just things that work better or not. Cool. Did that kind of address what we were looking for there?
Yes, yes, sir. I'm just trying to find it
Yeah.
to see where I was going wrong, but I'll let you know if I find it. Thank you.
Yeah. If I find it, I'll look at the language, and if it seems wrong to me, I'll poke the curriculum team and we'll update it.
Alright.
Yeah, because they're not busy at all. They're super busy. They're so busy. Awesome. So I think, do I want to do much more with this? I don't know if I do. I'm not overlooking anything. Yeah, I think this is good. So a teaser for what you're going to see in the near future. I oh yeah. So yeah, actually, let me show you one more thing. You probably already know this. I'm just going to show you for completeness. If we want to pass down a look at that, great. I'm just going to change our app body here to only take content. So it's going to display some content. I'm going to import our app body from that body. I'm going to change this from a div, from an H1, sorry, to app body. I'm going to put it in there. So many decisions. I'm just going to put it here. Let's say app body. Content equals, and I'm going to put some stuff in here. I'm going to give it a, I'm just going to say count first. That, and just for kicks, I'm going to make this H1 too. Great. Format, boom. So here I am passing down state as a prop. Let's verify that this works before I shoot off my mouth. Great, that works too. Hey, I'm being rendered. So this is doing the same thing that we were just doing. We have our state up top. We have a click on our button that's updating the state. But now instead of directly displaying it from this component, we are passing down count, which is in our state here, as a prop down here. And we're just displaying that in that component. Yeah, so you can kind of treat our state variables like any other variable, for better or worse. Two parts that I want to sort of talk about briefly here. Like we said before, components don't care about what's going on outside of them, or shouldn't, ideally. So if we're passing in props that contain content here, we don't care if that is from a variable, from state, from a function, anything. We just know that we're getting the content, we're displaying the content. Don't worry about anything else outside. If you do wind up doing stuff that depends on stuff outside, aside from one thing that we're going to learn about tomorrow, let's try to think about what we're doing there. But yeah, so in general, this does not care whether that's state, variable, function, whatever. Which means that if for some reason we wanted to move this button into this component, and we still wanted to keep track of it here, we need to do some thinking about, and this is where it starts to get a little more complicated about like where we want to keep our state. And I'm trying not to go into tomorrow's material too much, but just keep in mind that once you pass a prop into a component, whether it comes from state or not, this is read-only. Treat it as if it's read-only, and you can't change anything about it inside the component. So if you want to change it, you have to change it up where the state is, one way or another. We'll talk about that now. Briefly, and you'll definitely get into this more later on. State can be anything, right? It can be a number, it can be a string, It can be an array, it could be an object. It could be a function. Functions are objects. Objects are things that you can put in a variable. So you could put functions in your state as well and pass those down to be called in your child components. That's tomorrow's stuff. Don't worry about it too much. But the upshot is JavaScript has two kinds of values, right? There's the primitives, or numbers and strings and booleans, and then there's our reference values, which are objects and arrays, and functions are just objects. So in theory, you could pass an array in here that had some things, and then when we did stuff in here, we could say, oh, I don't know, content 0 or 1 equals something else. And so because it's a reference, we can change stuff up there. This will do you no good. Never do it ever. Treat this as read only. Don't try to change any of the stuff that you get from prompts. If you need to display it in another way, use a map, filter, sort, reduce, whatever you like. Never change anything that you get from props, expecting it to do anything outside of that component. I think the second thing is, I briefly touched on this earlier, but you can't change state. You can only update the state, and those sound like the same thing, but they're not. State is immutable for various technical and philosophical reasons in React. What useState is doing when we are doing a set count here, our initial value is 0, and set count isn't changing count to be 1. It is creating a new state and setting our new value to that. And that is a subtle but important difference that is more important when we start looking at arrays. Because when we want to update an array, I'm going to use a different name to make it a little bit clearer. We'll go back to our dogs. If we have an array like that, we can't just say in our function do stuff new dog. We can't just say, oh, set dogs. We can't say dogs push new dog. We can't say dogs 0 equals new dog. We can't change that directly. What we have to do is say we need to set it to a new state, and that state needs to be a new value. So we need to create a new array and copy the contents of the current array into it. And there's a few ways to do that. Current idiom is best practice is kind of using the spread operator, which you may have touched on in phase 1. If not, basically it's a way of saying, hey, I'm going to create a new array right here, and I'm going to use 3 dots and say that means put all the things that were in the other array into this array, dogs. And so that's creating a new array with the contents of the old array in it. And then we can add the new dog at the end. I don't want to go too deep into this, but you will definitely get more practice with this as you go on. I think this right here, and especially when you get to objects, this is the trickiest thing in React to get a handle on. And we're going to be doing it by hand a lot. When things go forward, there are libraries to take care of a lot of that for you, but just know that you cannot update the value of a state. You can only replace it with a new state. And if you're doing arrays or objects, you have to create a new array or object that has the values of the old one in it, and then whatever change you want. Yeah, Dane.
Yeah, just kind of thinking about this. Would you use this in like a patch when you're pushing to this? Like, would you set the state and then like patch that or post or
A post, yeah.
Yeah, it would be a patch probably. You'd be
Well,
affecting
if
the
you
overlay.
so if you create a new dog, right? I'm not going to
Yeah.
type this out because this is probably Thursday's lecture. You'll see plenty more of it in the future. So basically, in here, you would say, "Oh, I have a form. I'm going to put in the name, species, color, serial number, whatever. I'm going to do a post to create a new thing on our backend. Our backend will come back and say, hey, I created a new thing. Okay, here is the data for the new thing. And then you will take that new thing and you want to basically do this. You have your list of things and you're going to update it with a fresh array with all those things plus your new thing. And if you're
Cool.
doing a patch and changing something, you would find the objects that you want to change. You'll see. It's the most
Yeah.
complex part of React. It's a huge pain in the butt. I think there are libraries that make it easier for you, and we don't teach any of them. So
Yeah, I mean, one of the for me and Caleb's phase 1 project, we were doing something very similar a lot, and it was a pain in the butt
Yeah.
in vanilla JavaScript. So
yeah.
this already looks way easier than
Oh
how
yeah,
we
it
were
is.
doing
It is way easier. Yeah, but just keep that in mind. I don't think you're going to run into anything like that in the next day or so. So definitely we'll get more practice with it in tomorrow's and Thursdays and Friday's lecture, I guess. Whether or not that's me, we'll see. Yeah, so this is just like a teaser, like this is something to look out in the future. Don't sweat it too much right now. Other than that, I don't think there's really anything else I want to talk about here. So I'll leave it open for questions. And if we don't have any questions, this is a mercifully short lecture. So yeah, anything else you want to talk about?
I had a question. I found what I was talking about earlier in the curriculum. It's in a page called React State, and basically is talking about like how we set it up in this lecture with the count plus one, and then it says there's an issue with it in terms of it being asynchronous, so that it says since the new value of count is only available after React has re-rendered the component, we don't see immediate changes. And then it says we need to use a callback function. And
Yeah,
so
and yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So it was using the arrow function instead of just the count plus one, I guess. So I didn't really understand that.
Yeah, and callback function isn't really a real thing. It is a real thing. It's just an adjective that describes how a function is being used, like a blue function or fast function. Callback function is just a function. It's usually just a function that is being passed to something else to be used later on. So and you learn about this in like higher order functions in phase 1. So like map uses a callback function. I don't know that I would. Well, maybe you would call it that. I probably wouldn't call it a callback function, but you'll probably see it referred to as callback functions in other places. The asynchronous thing is interesting, and I think I would like to address that briefly. But yeah, upshot is it doesn't matter what kind of function you use as long as you're doing the same kind of logic in it, whether it's a arrow function, expression, a one-liner, whatever you like. Functions are functions. Yeah, I'm really curious to look at the wording of that. So the asynchronous thing. useState is an asynchronous function. And there are a few reasons why. But so the like do the galaxy brain meme. Like the top one is like, oh, useState changes the value of a thing. useState updates the value of a thing. and then Galaxy Brain is use state puts in a polite request to react to when you have a moment. Would you mind updating the thing? And so what that means is that if we go back to our function here, let's do it this way. So set count is asynchronous. So let's do 4. And oops. So in the middle understanding of it, we would expect, and every single one of you will run into this and be confused by it. Every single one of you, guaranteed. I've seen it every single time. We look at our value before, great, it's 0. We set count to count plus 1, great. We log it afterwards and it's still 0. And we don't know why. And let me prove that I'm not lying, unless I am. Look at that, before 0, after 0. But now it's 1. And if I click it again, before is 1, after 1. What? Although we see 2 on there. And this is the asynchronous part. It's making a request to react, to update it when you get a chance, which means that when you run JavaScript right after set count, it's still looking at the current count value until that frame goes by and we re-render it, and then the count is set, because the value count again is set up here at the top of the function. So down here, it's still like, yeah, it's still 0. What are you talking about? And so that's the asynchronous thing. You will definitely see it, especially when you're every single time, like try to console log a state after you set it. It's always going to be the old value. So my recommendation is, if you are console logging, if you're like me and debug with the console log it all, put it at the top of your function here. That will on render. That will do it on render, and so we can see the actual value that's going to be. Yeah, so that's what we mean when we say set count is asynchronous. Set count doesn't change or update the value directly. It sends in a request to React to do it when they get a chance. Yeah, Dane.
So yeah, on my project, we had this a ton of asynchronous stuff, and I like kind of Googled the solution, and the solution was async and async await, like async function.
Yeah.
Is that like that not a good practice? Like it got it running, but
yeah, so that's an interesting question. So async await is considered a best practice now, and I disagree with that best practice. And maybe just because I'm old and crusty, but when, in my mind, when you're using async, like especially like fetch, so fetch is an asynchronous function. If you use callbacks or promises, sorry, the way that we did them in phase 1, we know that we're going to make the request and it's going to be asynchronous, and it'll come back a millisecond or 10 minutes later and run our dot then, and then what happens in the dot then happens, and so on. That seems to me, that exposes what is actually happening, and it helps me think about it, reason about it better. When you use that async await context, so basically you use a async in front of your function, and then in front of the asynchronous part, you say await this. Basically what it'll do, it'll run that and then wait for it to come back, and then when it comes back, it'll run the next line. And to me, that is more confusing because it makes your code look as if it is synchronous when it is not. And I think that can lead to troubles in thinking about how your code works. A lot of people love it. A lot of people use it. A lot of people recommend it. I don't not recommend it. I prefer it the promises way. Under the hood, it's still a promise. They just hide it from you. I'm not a fan of things being hidden. So that's why I tend not to use it or recommend it. But definitely worth looking at. You will definitely see it in code that you see out in the world. So it's good to understand. Did I go off on a tangent, or did I actually answer the thing you asked?
It did answer what I was asking, but my question was also kind of a tangent. So yeah.
Yeah, and so what that would look like here would be, and then you could do, we'll do our console logs. I don't actually, I've never tried this. I don't know if what I'm saying is true or not. Well, let's find out. We can do some science. So what I think is going to happen, and this is, I'm sure you've gone through, you've had the debugging talk, and this is another tangent. When you're debugging stuff, and especially when students ask me questions, either in person or on Slack, I'm always asking them to give me their question in the format of what are you expecting to happen? What are you trying to do? What are you expecting it to do? What is it doing instead? And what have you tried already? So what I'm expecting this to do is print the previous value count here. And then since we're doing an await, we knew that before, since it's asynchronous, it's going to be the same value this time. Since I'm doing an await here, and this is an asynchronous function, I expect it to give us the actual value afterwards. I say expect, meaning that it might do it, but I don't think it will, just because of the way React works. So let's do some science and find out what happens. So on render is 0, when I hit increment, oh, this is so exciting. I have no idea what's going to happen, actually. Look at that. Oh, look at that. Wow. I would not have anticipated that, but I understand exactly why it's doing that. So look at that. When we hit the button, it logs out the current value of the state, 0. Then it logs out. So then it re-renders the thing, and we get the new value on render. And then it pops back to our function and says, oh yeah, this one, it's still 0 because and this is a weird, nerdy, exciting thing for me here. This really demonstrates changing versus updating, because if it just changed the value, when we went back, I would expect it to be a 1 here. But since it's updating the value in the state, it's updating the state. That means it's replacing the state with a new thing, which means that the old thing still exists. And so that's why we're getting the previous value afterwards, even though it is executing in that async await kind of thing. That's fascinating. I would not have expected that, but I understand. Really interesting. So don't do that. It will probably do unexpected things. Yeah, and see this leads to really, I think this syntax leads to really unintuitive behavior. But others disagree, so you don't have to listen to me.
Well, don't you have to like set a timer for the await, like however many seconds or something?
No, that's what the await does built in. Yeah, and setting timers to wait for asynchronous things also a dark pattern, an anti-pattern, because asynchronous means asynchronous. You don't know when it's going to come back. It could come back the next instant, or could come back a year later. So you don't know when it's coming back. And if you said, oh, 10 seconds should be enough for this request to come back, and the server is down and doesn't respond for 30 seconds, it's going to be a problem. So yeah, don't use timers to check out asynchronous stuff, for sure. Yeah, and so without the async, this does what I expect it to do before 1, after 1, and on record does it in a different order. Interesting, yeah. Until you get a really good handle on how async stuff works, I would recommend avoiding async await. But again, you will see that code everywhere out in the wild. People use it, people love it. I prefer not to. But it's definitely a tool that exists. And if it makes sense to you, then go for it. Yeah, previous state for sure. Cool. That was kind of a tangent, but again, mostly tangents. What other questions do we have about this stuff?
I do have another question, but it comes with two caveats. One is please say let's not get into another tangent if you want to.
Yeah,
And then the
we
other
got
thing is
time.
I know we've been going for over an hour, so I don't want to trap people in my question. But there's material in the curriculum about working with multiple state variables that I
Mhm.
was really hoping to have you or hear you talk through, just because it's something that I kind of was able to work my way through in the lab, but it's not exactly clicking yet. I was hoping to be able to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so all you really need to do is, set more states. So then you can just treat each one of these things as you would expect. These are the values, these are the setters. They don't really interact. You can have 100 of them if you want to. I don't recommend that. But yeah, you can definitely have as many states as you want, and it works just fine. If you have, the case I would recommend, if you have like first name, last name, email, address, and so on. Instead of setting a different state for each of those, I would say like const user info. Okay, user state, and then use an object for that. And then each of those things is going to be a key on that object, and you only have the one state to worry about. Again, you will play with this and discover what way works for you best. But yeah, but short version is you can put as many states in there as you want. Yeah, Dane.
Yeah, so one of the functionalities of just kind of default functionality on like, is there a way to set the default for use state if in case we pass user info and it doesn't have an email?
Oh,
Is there a way to
interesting.
set that default into that object, or we have to
Mhm.
set that individually?
Yeah.
Is that just works?
Yeah, yeah. Because
Okay.
you're setting an initial value. That value is an object. And so you can just treat that just like any other object.
And then you just overwrite it, whatever
Mhm.
information. If it doesn't have those specific keys, it'll just default to the default.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. In that case, I'd probably do something like, if I'm getting stuff from a form or from a fetch request, go through each of those keys and say if the key exists and update the thing. But it depends on, it'll be different for each use case. Awesome. Anything else? Cool. Well, I will let you get back to it then. Thanks for hanging out. This is super fun for me to talk about. So anytime you want to ask stuff, hit me up and I'll be around. Last call. Anything else before we go?
Just one, I want to talk with you a little bit about some solutions from my previous project, kind of working through those, because I was thinking about doing that, refactoring it into React for my next project.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Would love to just steal you for 5-10 minutes and talk about it a little bit, if that's okay.
yeah, for sure. Cool. Yeah. Slack me about, or not Slack me. We're not on Slack anymore. Send me a DM about that, or post on the channel, and we'll arrange that. Talk. Is that cool?
Yep, that'd be great.
Awesome. Sweet. Well, yeah. Thanks for hanging out. I hope this was useful. The videos are all going to be on YouTube when it gets up. So if you want to go back and do stuff, look at it there. And I'll catch you all
Thank
next time.
you.
You bet.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.